So it seems the conversation has changed. The consoles are now limited in their capabilities, or at least the limitations are now being visualized by everyone. Whenever the games are trying to do performance modes, we're having that these consoles are not capable of actually doing a very good job because the games have a lot of detail, a lot of visual effects, open world assets, and so on and so forth, that it's actually getting, the consoles to actually have to drop down resolution, or at least developers are having to drop resolution down to as low as 720 to achieve 60 FPS in Final Fantasy. I also remember that games like, A Plague Tale had to be modified for its rats to be able to get the game to 60 FPS, and also a lot of quality of assets and characteristics of AI and NPC and open world detail had to be scaled down to get that game, which is even a much slower game than Final Fantasy, to be able to run at 60 FPS. I also remember that Digital Foundry covered all of this, and it seems like their tone has changed drastically, especially when you compare what it is that they did with talking about the 30 FPS side of Gotham Knights. Now, in their Gotham Knights breakdown and technical analysis, I think the Digital Foundry critic, his issue was more with the art direction of Gotham Knights compared to Arkham Knight. But he also mentioned the frame rates of, the Gotham Knights game, and talked about how there were frame drops in specific areas. And it seemed like at that time, that was basically the one thing that a lot of people focused on. A lot of people said, oh no, the game is not even running at a block 30 FPS. This is bad, blah, blah, blah. When this same Digital Foundry person, got to the Final Fantasy one, and the Final Fantasy game dropped a few FPS, he said, well, it drops FPS in some places, but 90% of the game is fine at locked 30 FPS. So what's going on? Well, like I usually say, gamers play favorites. When it comes to your favorite game, you're going to see a lot of gamers, including critics, make this kind of interesting distinction after they've heavily critiqued another game that they probably didn't care too much for. It's human nature. When I was calling this stuff out, a lot of people were disliking and dislike bombing my videos and my tweets, but I'm keeping all of the receipts and I'm making sure that I actually put all this stuff under the light. Now, there's a technical side to all of this that's going on. This is not necessarily something that, these conversations are trying to skip over. No, because I even remember that Legend of Zelda, yes, it's a game that's running on the Switch. Even Legend of Zelda itself got the soft glove treatment because it also drops FPS in many areas, in the game. And the, community of gamers are like, well, it drops FPS, but they're claiming that because it's, on a old machine, then, it should be okay. No, you should maintain that same energy every single given time. The reason I say that is because the Switch itself can run games at 60 FPS. Not saying Zelda should run at 60 FPS, but if it's locking itself to 30 FPS and you say 30 FPS and all of this stuff must be consistent, then you ought to be consistent as well. I decided to bring this up because I have a hypothesis as to what's going on, not with Zelda. Zelda's in a locked ecosystem, but with games like Final Fantasy, as well as games like Gotham Knights, and as well as games like A Plague Tale. Why are these games running at 30 FPS on the console? What could be going on when in reality, if you think about other games like, say, Spider-Man Miles Morales and, Horizon Forbidden West and God of War and all these other games, they are targeting 60 FPS, getting close to 60 FPS and getting the job done. Could it be that we might be seeing a disparity regarding a lot of different things? Now, a leaked, conference of some kind that was done with Insomniac Games about the hardware in the PS5 showed that Insomniac had actually been envisioning how they were going to use this PS5 to actually develop their Spider-Man game to be able to run better performance, the streaming, the SSD capabilities, and also the possibility that they had an early prototype of the PS5 earlier than everybody else probably helped their case to be able to get them to be able to leverage every single possibility of the console. Studios like Santa Monica and Gorilla, being Sony primary studios, possibly also had a very, 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 in my opinion anyways, early start over all the other companies. Perhaps they all got it at the same time, but at least these guys were building their games from ground up to be able to leverage this one console, this particular system itself. If you look at other studios, on the other hand, they probably got their dev kits mid-development of their games. And so for them to go ahead and try to port their ambitious games to 60 FPS, they realized that this was probably not the case at some point in their development. Now, some studios were able to maybe, and this is me just hypothesizing. This is a hypothesis, by the way. It's just a theory. So some studios, in my opinion, probably were able to go ahead and, make, say, a performance mode with some caveats. Studios like, what's their name? The studio that did A Plague's Tale, studios like the Final Fantasy developers at Square Enix, and so on and so forth. They were able to make some caveats and say, okay, we'll do, 60 FPS, but maybe we'll have to lock combat at 720, resolution, or whatever it may be. But some games were probably not capable of doing that. Some games did not have that support, so the devs went ahead and dropped their games at 30 FPS. Now, what's worse is, if these consoles were as powerful as everybody say they are or should be, these games would have been able to just be brute forced into 60 FPS at 1080p resolution at least. But most of these games are not even capable of being brute forced that way without hearing reports of the consoles pretty much overheating in games like Final Fantasy, 16, whenever you're in specific boss fights. So all of this stuff, when you actually think about it, it tells me that these consoles are actually not as powerful as many would claim it to be. You see, the PC hardware equivalences that have been done, even though there is not really a direct equivalent from the console to PC, is showing that when you think about it, the way PC actually processes video games, when you're talking about, the power of the PC CPUs compared to the power of the PS5 CPUs, the consoles are already basically done for. They're locked and you can't upgrade them except you're building a new console mid-generation. And what you get in your console is what you get. So seeing that, I think developers are going to have to make the choice of making smaller games, or we're going to continue to see 30 FPS games even in this new generation where you see on the box of your Series X 4K 120 FPS support, or the box of your PS5 up to 8K, and all of those other claims that these manufacturing companies are making. And they're not telling you it's up to 8K in games like Tetris. They're not telling you the full fact that, a game that is an open world game that has action sequences, that has all kinds of different things, visual effects and enemy AI, is not going to hit that 120, FPS 4K dream that everybody has in their minds, because these games are running all kinds of different processes. So yes, the next Sony games are going to be at 60 FPS, but they're going to be those hand-holding cinematic games that you're going to be looking at a place on the map, but you're not going to be able to go there until you follow a specific route. This was my biggest issue with God of War Ragnarok, because that game was very, very carefully curated to be able to run at a very high performance. They made it where you had to literally walk through specific or go through specific areas to be able to reach specific destinations. It made the game kind of frustrating, because for a game that pretended, or at least gave you the illusion of being an open world game, it wasn't an open world game. It was a kind of a semi-linear title. A game like Horizon Forbidden West, on the other hand, that's the one that's actually quite interesting as to how Guerrilla is able to optimize and allow for the game to just run very well. Possibly they may be using a lot of different interesting methods. They could be using some dynamic resolution scaling as well to be able to give you 60 FPS as well. But when it comes to natively running 60 FPS at 4K or native 30 FPS at 4K, not many games are able to do it. In fact, Gotham Knights, I think, is one of the few games that's basically able to do something like that in terms of locking the game at native 4K at 30 FPS. But some people have claimed that if they reduce the resolution, it's going to give you 60 FPS. But again, we realize that that's not necessarily how it works. You may need to reduce the game to actually 720 to be able to get that 60 FPS like we're seeing in a game like Final Fantasy. So 720 FPS is probably something that we should be looking and saying is probably not acceptable for these consoles. And so, what is there to give? So I think what this has done overall is it exposed a lot of the overreactionary internet culture that was quick to judge a game like Gotham Knights. And the reason I'm making these videos is because I was called a madman. I was called a shill. I was called defending the devs, when in reality, every other person that said I was defending the devs right now is probably making comments on videos like these Final Fantasy reviews and saying, well, it's such a great game. It's just too bad that, we can't really get 60 FPS. You should see the comments. It's insane. I mean, think about it. A lot of these people are just basically making, they're blowing off everything because they like this game, I mean, it's quite, in my opinion, fascinating to see all this free receipts that are here, when in reality, a lot of these folk criticize Gotham Knights heavily. And if you look at even the comments on Gotham Knights, you'll be laughing overall, seeing that, the mental switch is quite interesting. But it is what it is. I wanted to go ahead and make this video just because I thought it would be appropriate to keep the receipt and keep the tabs. And yes, I'm going to get the comment that says, well, Gotham Knights was not really criticized because of its FPS or whatever. It's because of other things. I know, but the FPS conversation came up in it, and I'm making sure that we actually document that gamers played the switcheroo on themselves, basically saying 30 FPS is fine in games that they like. And so we're going to go with that rule, and I'm going to hold them accountable to it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.